8 months without food. People ate leather from boots, rats, and their own dead. Antioch turned crusaders into cannibals. And that was just the beginning of the horror. Year 1097, tens of thousands of European warriors marched to reclaim lands and reach Jerusalem. This is the First Crusade. But Antioch, a massive walled city in Syria, became their trap. They thought they'd take it in weeks. They were dead wrong. This is the story of how a holy mission turned into 8 months of starvation, disease, betrayal, and madness. The siege began in October, year 1097. The Crusader army surrounded Antioch with confidence. They had numbers, they had faith, they had momentum from earlier victories. The plan was simple: cut off the city, starve them out, force surrender. It should have taken weeks, maybe a month at most. But Antioch was no ordinary city. Massive stone walls stretched for miles, studded with over 400 towers. The Turkish garrison inside was well supplied and disciplined. They had food, water, and something the Crusaders didn't: time. The Turks could wait. The Crusaders couldn't. Winter hit like a hammer. Cold rain turned the camp into a swamp of mud and filth. Tents collapsed. Fires wouldn't stay lit. The army that came from warm Mediterranean ports wasn't ready for Syrian winter. Men froze at night and sweated during the day. Disease started spreading almost immediately. Then the food ran out. Supply lines from Europe never materialized. Local villages had already been stripped bare by earlier Crusader armies. Foraging parties ventured farther and farther from camp, only to find nothing. Horses started dying, first from exhaustion, then from starvation. Soldiers ate them, then they ate the dogs that followed the army, then the rats. By December, the real horror began. Men were starving to death in their tents. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Deserters fled by the hundreds, trying to make it back to Constantinople or Europe. Most died on the road. And inside Antioch, the Turks watched from the walls, safe and fed, waiting for the Crusaders to collapse. By spring of year 1098, the Crusader camp had transformed into something unrecognizable. These weren't holy warriors anymore. They were walking skeletons in rusted armor, men who had forgotten what it meant to be human. The mission to Jerusalem felt like a cruel joke. Survival was the only goal now. The cannibalism started as whispers. Rumors that some men were doing the unthinkable, then it became impossible to ignore. When a soldier died, his body didn't stay whole for long. Chroniclers from that time wrote about scenes that sound like nightmares. Bodies boiled in pots over open fires, flesh roasted on spits. The smell became normal. Some crusaders stopped hunting for food in villages and started hunting for people instead. Disease killed more than any battle. Dysentery swept through the camp in waves. Typhus followed. Men would be healthy one day and dead 3 days later. The army that started with over 100,000 fighters had shrunk to barely 40,000. Most weren't even capable of fighting anymore. They just sat in their tents, waiting to die, or for a miracle that never came. The psychological toll was worse than the physical. Knights who had sworn sacred oaths now lived like wild animals. Priests who preached about righteousness watched their congregations become monsters. Noblemen who came seeking glory now fought over scraps of rotten meat. The crusade had promised paradise and delivered hell instead. And through it all, Antioch's walls stood untouched, mocking, unbreakable, The Turks inside had won without fighting a single major battle. They just had to wait for winter and hunger to do their work. The Crusaders were destroying themselves. All the Turks had to do was watch. June, year 1098. 8 months of absolute hell. The Crusader army was on the edge of total collapse. Then everything changed because of one man's betrayal. His name was Firuz, a Turkish officer who controlled 3 towers on Antioch's western wall. The Crusader leaders had been secretly negotiating with him for weeks. They offered him gold, land, protection. Firuz had his own reasons for betrayal, personal grudges against the city's governor. On the night of June 3rd, he made his choice. He would open the gates. That night, in total darkness, Crusader soldiers climbed rope ladders up to Firuz's towers. They moved in silence, terrified of being discovered. Once inside, they killed the guards and opened the main gates from within. The starving army poured into Antioch like a dam had burst. 8 months of rage, hunger, and humiliation exploded in one night. The slaughter was beyond brutal. Crusaders killed everyone they found. Turkish soldiers, civilians, even local Christians who had lived under Turkish rule. Streets ran with blood. Houses were looted and burned. By morning, thousands were dead. The Crusaders had their victory. Finally, after 8 months of suffering, Antioch belonged to them. But the celebration lasted exactly one day. On June 5th, scouts brought terrifying news. A massive relief army led by Kerboga, the governor of Mosul, had arrived. Tens of thousands of fresh Turkish troops surrounded the city completely. Now the Crusaders were trapped inside the same walls that had tortured them. The hunters had become the hunted. They had no food, no escape route, and an enemy outside who could wait as long as needed. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just switched sides. Trapped inside Antioch with Kerboga's army outside, the Crusaders faced their own medicine: starvation, disease, despair. Many wanted to surrender or flee. The leadership was fracturing. Then something strange happened that changed everything. A peasant named Peter Bartholomew claimed he had a vision. He said he knew where to find an ancient spear buried beneath the Church of St. Peter. He pointed to a specific spot under the floor. They dug, and they found a spearhead buried in the ground. Whether it was the relic he claimed or just an old weapon didn't matter to anyone. Was it real? Was it planted? Historians still debate this, but for the starving, broken Crusaders, the truth was irrelevant. They needed hope more than they needed food. That rusty piece of metal became their symbol of survival. The impossible suddenly felt possible. Morale surged overnight. Men who were ready to die now wanted to fight. On June 28, the Crusaders made an insane decision. They would march out and face Kerboga's massive army in open battle. They were outnumbered, starving, and exhausted. But they had nothing left to lose. They marched out of Antioch carrying their newfound spear, ready to die fighting rather than starving in a siege. What happened next shocked everyone. Kerboga's army, despite having every advantage, fell apart. Internal conflicts between different Turkish factions erupted. Coordination collapsed. When the Crusaders attacked, the Turkish lines scattered and ran. The battle became a rout. Antioch was truly theirs, but the cost was staggering. Tens of thousands dead, an army broken in body and spirit. The survivors weren't holy warriors anymore. They were just men who had seen hell and somehow walked out alive. The road to Jerusalem still waited ahead. But Antioch had already taken everything they had.